All right. It is 7:08. We will call our Board of Selectmen meeting to order. It's March 8th, 2021. We'll start off with any amendments to the agenda. Does anyone have anything? I have one thing. So we have another appointment that we're going to make under new business under 4.1, hopefully to the Finance Committee. So just adding that. So we'll move on to 3.1, minutes from February 22nd, 2021. Do I have a motion to move the meeting? Moved by Rob, second. By Tor. Any comments? Tor?
In the marijuana ordinance discussion, where we refer to Glendenning suggesting meeting outside professional point of view, healthy Lincoln County. I remember that part of that discussion talking about meeting with a state, the state office of marijuana. So not sure if it was me exactly that said it or another member, but I think that should be added in to that paragraph somewhere.
Added along with healthy Lincoln County?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Anyone saw?
That'll look good.
Okay. All those in favor? All right. So that's 3 in favor, 1 abstaining. And then we'll just move on to unfinished business, and we'll jump right into the marijuana ordinance / ordinances discussion.
New business first.
What's that?
New business.
Oh, new business. I'm sorry. 4.1 appointment, planning board Lee Emmons, and appointment finance committee Ben Fry. I saved it for that.
Well, let me start with the one maybe we'll save Ben for last, I suppose. So Lee contacted me this winter, shortly after we had the approval of the code, or right around that time, expressed an interest in getting involved somewhere, anywhere, and boy, when someone says that, you're like, wow. The problem was, what golden ticket, how do we cash this in, and where would he be best served? And I had a chance to talk with Ben, and we've had some vacancies that have cropped up on the planning board this winter, and sent some emails back and forth with Lee, and he's in favor and supportive of jumping on that esteemed group who have had a lot of work of late. We'll have even more probably work in the months ahead, but I'm really eager to get involved and to give back. So the more we can have people who are willing to step forward and want to assist, I think we're going to find that's probably going to be one of the things that we need most. We talked about this in the other committees, and so I think this is just the latest evidence of this. So anyway, Lee is eager and excited to get going, and as soon as we approve this, we'll send him an email and he can come in and sign the papers, or assuming you will approve this appointment. So I have to speak about Ben. I think we know Ben. Fry. Do you want to do them at once, or do you want to do it separately, Joel?
We can do it, but why don't we do it separately?
Okay.
So a motion to appoint Lee Emmons to the planning board.
So
Moved. Second.
Second.
Tor, second. All those in favor, or any discussion?
I
No,
have one question before you
Yeah.
vote. So where are we with vacancies on the planning board right now?
There'll be one vacancy. Well, that was weird. There'll be one vacancy. My finger disappeared in the river. Yeah, there'll be one vacancy remaining on the planning board after this appointment. So,
And that's not an
yeah.
alternate. That's a That's a member.
Yes, that would be an alternate position. Now, there is a question. Yeah, we need to talk. Peter Mcnaughton's seat is currently an alternate seat. He is actively engaged in that group, as active as anyone, as a member of that committee. I'd love to see him take that full seat, but so that's going to require some conversation. So I don't want to let the cat out of the bag if Peter's watching. Hi, Peter. But we'd love to have him take on as much responsibility as he's willing to. He's been a great member of that group. But we need individuals at this point. So the more who are interested, we'd love, if there's others out there, we'd love to have them step forward and put them before you all for appointment.
Great.
Yeah.
I'll just remind, this is fun.
Yeah.
Planning board's a fun group. I mean, really, it's a fun group. You know, I mean, the four of you have done the ordinance review. You know, well, with reviewing the ordinance and the code, and you've been through all that. But it's kind of exciting to be, you know, the party that reviews new businesses coming to town and helping, you know, folks who are trying to start their small business. I mean, it is kind of an exciting thing. It's you know, that was always the best part of being a code officer, was helping someone kind of realize something that they really want to do. And so as a member of a planning board, you can be part of that, you know. And so yeah, I think it is fun, Rob. Yeah, it's exciting. It is. So we'd love them more.
I'm just watching the transcription. It's pretty funny. So all those in favor of appointing Lee Emmons to the planning board? All right, that passes 4-0. I'm gonna turn it off. I don't even know how to turn this up. Oh God. So moving on to appointment of Ben Fry to the Finance Committee.
Well, I think, you all know Ben. Ben was in on Friday. He's been in the office 2 or 3 times over the last week asking questions about budget. And quite frankly, I'd rather have him answering those questions as a part of a committee than as a gadfly resident who is bothering me and taking my, no, just kidding. No, but in all seriousness, I mean, I think for the 4 of you, I think it'd be beneficial that the more people we have involved who have historical knowledge in budget creation is a good thing. The 5, or eventually 5, but the 4 selectmen right now, I mean, you still drive the bus in terms of budget, but it's always good to have those somewhat sage voices, and you can discard them as recommendations only, but at least to have some thoughts of where we've gone. We lost a lot of institutional knowledge in the last year with Ben and Brian walking away. So there's, you know, while I've been around, you know, 4.5 years, Joel's been around 5.5 years, which is, you know, sometimes a lifetime, but there's the history of how the board went from 2009 to 2020 and 2021 is important, I think, for us in terms of how our budgets look today. But it's really important that's when you hear that evidence, but it's really the 4 of you making the decisions about direction and focus. And so to be able to have that knowledge back at the table, I think would really serve the town well. So he had an interest, and as I said, anybody who's interested, I'm pretty much throwing before you because we have so many committee seats that could really be filled and could really use some voices. So that's why he's here.
All right. So do I have a motion to accept?
I'm kind of locked up.
What's
Can
that?
you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you, Tor. Your video's frozen, but I can hear you.
Frozen.
All right, it's a little spotty here.
Okay. I think you're back.
All right.
You there, Tor?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Your video is still frozen.
Let me, sorry, carry on. Let me see if I can.
Better.
We'll pause for a minute here.
That's how I feel when my video isn't working either.
Yeah,
You
me
know.
too.
All right, let's try that again.
All right,
There he is.
there you are. So do I have a motion to appoint Ben Fry to the Finance Committee? Wanda, second.
Well, second.
Bob? Any discussion? All right, all those in favor? Passes 4-0. All right, so we have new business out of the way. Now we get to move on to marijuana ordinances discussion 5.1. So Peter, do you wanna take us away on this, or?
Sure. Happy to start. So basically, you guys know that there was a citizen petition that brought forward the idea of doing adult use marijuana. And adult use is effectively the same kind of use that we have for alcohol. We don't limit alcohol to medicinal uses, despite what my grandmother used to say she drank for. But it's the same thing now with marijuana. There are some changes from the citizen law that was enacted. The biggest one is that the original citizens petition called for basically marijuana bars. They were termed smoking social clubs. And those clubs are no longer in the law. It was too controversial in the legislature. So the legislature amended the citizens petition in several ways to basically curtail that sort of behavior. It isn't that, marijuana can't have shops, but it can't have locations where you go and smoke recreationally. So the major thing about this law that's important is that in order to gain passage of the citizens petition, the drafters drafted it as what's called an opt-in law. And an opt-in law says that while it may be legal, statewide, only towns that opt in to allow certain activities basically have to allow those activities. In other words, if a town doesn't do anything, the town takes no action, then there are no marijuana uses that are established for that town. Many towns are basically taking the, laissez-faire attitude of not opting in. They're just saying, we might do this if it helps, but we're not going to rush to judgment. Other towns have taken the lead and said, hey, we're excited about what's a potential new industry. And they've enacted marijuana ordinances, which allow several or all of the uses. The types of uses that are allowed. Oh, actually, first, any questions so far? No? Okay. So by the way, am I coming through clear?
Yeah.
Okay. The type of uses that are allowed are basically, you can have marijuana shops. You can have, cultivators or growers. That's the second kind of use. You can have what the state has termed testing facilities. And then you can have manufacturing facilities. So if you go through each one of those parts of the statute, a shop is pretty self-explanatory. We have several in Damascus already, and many places in the state now they're legal. You've probably driven by the one in Woolwich, a little while after the bridge and after Cumberland Farms, headed north. So those you see around in lots of towns, and many towns who have elected to do this have kind of limited it to the shops. Okay. The next kind of thing you can have is a cultivation facility. And a cultivation facility or grower is where they're growing and packaging marijuana. And these, by the way, these are all distinct uses from the medical marijuana law, and I want to make that clear as well. This law does not replace or amend the medical marijuana law. So that's still, fully state licensed. You can do it anywhere with the proper medical cards. You can sell to the number of people that you have cards for. So this does not in any way change that. So even though the adult use is an opt-in law, the medical is not an opt-in law. We actually can't really restrict it without state statutory support for doing so. So after cultivation facilities, and again, these could be things, where they're growing marijuana, they're packaging it for wholesale to be sold to, for example, manufacturing facilities where it might be enriched or changed from, for example, a dried leaf form that might be turned into an oil, or one of the edible products that are on sale everywhere. But cultivation is really just growing. Okay. And that's the second most common area that's been allowed. There are not many towns that I know of, at least kind of in the mid-coast, that are engaged in the last two, which are testing and manufacturing. So testing facilities are basically, how would I call these? They're basically testing for the level of different compounds in marijuana products. Okay. So, if you sell, let's say cookies at some level of marijuana, of THC, which is the active ingredient in marijuana. These testing facilities basically, check cookies every once in a while as quality control to make sure, that they have the correct amount. And, with some of these different, some of these different items that could be, pretty important to have that. I see that more in the medical context than in the adult use context, but the way that those were legalized statewide is as adult use. Those were not really legalized as part of the medical system or the medical regime in that medical statute. So these are different kinds of facilities, but this could be quite important. So for example, if you have someone with cancer who is relying on marijuana as a treatment option, you need to have products that they can consume that have the necessary amount of the active ingredient. And so those testing facilities could be quite important. And also with manufacturing facilities, again, these are places that create value-added goods that contain, THC and other potential active ingredients that are found in marijuana. So, some of these things are, like I said, gummies, edibles, cookies. There might be oils. I think that I recall, I don't have it right in front of me, but I believe tinctures, which are when you use alcohol or water to distill down the ingredients instead of oils. And there are other sorts of applied things you might have. Like you might have an ointment that contains some active ingredient from marijuana that, for example, diminishes pain in a patient. So again, the manufacturing facility and testing facilities, the reason I mention these in particular is they have kind of the most potential positive economic impact for a town. But as well, like many industrial uses, they also may carry the largest impacts. It's not hard to think of a manufacturing facility that's distilling down marijuana, might have all kinds of different impacts. So if a town does legalize that kind of facility, they might want to be careful a little bit about how and where they allow those sorts of uses to happen. I've seen some, I know of one town where they only allowed, this was a curious approach, and I'm wondering if it might apply in Newcastle. They only allowed marijuana shops in the rural district of the town. And I initially said, you guys have a village. Why are you doing this? And they said, well, we don't really want it to be a downtown use. We want this to be something where adults can drive to get it if they want to get it. But we don't want it, downtown near a school or the public library or, any of these other sorts of uses. So I thought that was an interesting approach. I see that more in the testing or manufacturing facilities, but I thought it was an interesting approach to dealing with those sorts of issues. If you said, you can have a testing facility, but it's got to be on a 25-acre parcel in the rural zone, that might work quite well at managing the impacts. So those are the basic uses that you can do. Now, how do we do this? Well, what we would do is we would basically draft an ordinance that said what we were going to opt into, what uses would be allowed. And then once we do that, the state licensing of those facilities already has standards in Augusta, and they actually govern those licensing standards. So they're still gonna require that facilities have some minimum standards, and those sorts of things, basically are they do it through what's called an adult use license. And that adult use license requires a bunch of different stuff, but some of them are things like, that you can't have a drug conviction, or you haven't, previously lost your license to grow or sell marijuana. You have to be 21. You can't have, a criminal history. I think you're allowed to have, obviously, misdemeanors, but you can't have any felonies. So those sorts of standards for adult uses or adult use licenses, and a particular person who basically carries that license, those are still controlled up at the state level. And for like testing facilities, that goes through, I believe it goes through Health and Human Services. Okay, so each of these different uses have different licensing authorities that deal with what they basically can do. So I guess that's kind of a broad overview of the law. We would have to pass an ordinance that would say what we would allow, and we could limit some of those uses in different ways. Like, so for example, you could limit what part of town something could happen in. You could place qualitative restrictions. You could have performance standards that they had to meet, and this would be something that based on our new draft land use ordinance, we wouldn't modify the land use ordinance. What we would do instead is we would have a marijuana ordinance, or an adult use marijuana ordinance, and that ordinance would govern all of those aspects. It would probably dovetail with the current land use ordinance, but it would be a separate ordinance, because in case the state decides to change the regime for dealing with this, the town may or may not want to just revoke the whole ordinance when that happens. So again, it would fit well with how we're doing things now, where we have separated out, quasi state control things like, shoreland, or, different kinds of ordinances like that. So any questions?
So I just wanted to start off, just so what we talked about at the last meeting was sort of not looking at it as a whole right now, but maybe looking into more in depth into the cultivation end of the ordinance, because it seemed easier in some ways, and there's some interest from parties to start doing this. So that was one area in particular that we were kind of looking at, and the idea was a June timeframe. If we were going to proceed with this at the rate that we were talking about, again, we're just sort of getting the education right now. Nothing's been set. We haven't decided whether we're going to proceed with this or not. But we were toying with the idea of looking into the reality of whether this would be something that would even be feasible in June if we were to pick it apart one sort of piece at a time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there would be any problem with getting this on the June warrant. If you guys have a clear idea of what you want as a board. Now, if you're going to go the committee route in which you appoint a committee to deal with it, I think that might take some serious time. But if you wanted to basically, have a draft ordinance as a starting point, I could throw a draft ordinance together for you next week.
Okay.
This is my first rodeo on this law, so I'm happy to kind of dovetail on other stuff I've done.
Okay. Anyone have anything? Rob?
Yeah, two things. One, I think we last week or last meeting, our discussion really was that we don't feel like we're in a position to try to do a comprehensive marijuana ordinance that addresses all of these things right now, but that it makes sense, as Joel said, to start probably on the cultivation end of things and get that in this time frame that we talked about.
Okay.
The second point was my reading of the John, for our last meeting, had shared a number of resources with us, and my reading was that on the medical marijuana side, that the state regulates caregivers, and caregivers can do cultivation, processing, and sale to their client base. But we can regulate how they do those things. So we can't stop them from doing cultivation. So today, my understanding is that a medical marijuana caregiver can do cultivation in Newcastle. So that, I think, behooves us to put regulations in place so that anyone who's doing marijuana cultivation, whether it's medical or adult use, has to follow certain standards. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, you're correct. I mean, you can do you can basically regulate so you can use kind of zoning regulations and hours and stuff like that. What I was saying is that you can't outlaw it. And if they're doing a home, so for example, if you're in the rural, right, like let's say you had a rural zone where there was no commercial activity allowed. Okay. My reading of the statute as it exists is that you could do a medical marijuana growing facility there, assuming that you had, the state licensing of the cards, and you had your set people who show up and buy from you. Medical caregivers can't just sell to anybody.
Right.
They're supposed to sell to given people. So it's that law is much more heavily prescribed, and you certainly can do things to kind of regulate it on the town level, but it isn't the kind of flexibility that's granted in this statute for adult use.
But could we, for example, say, no odors leaving the property, things like that for the caregivers. If, would they be bound by regulations like, a certain land area, or, things like the no odors leaving the property? Or can we bind that?
So I think there are state standards for a lot of that stuff. If the state hasn't spoken on the standard, I would say that you probably could impose a standard. So if the state has said, for example, like I know that the thing that I remember from the medical use standards are when you have outside marijuana cultivation, I think you're supposed to have, and I apologize, I didn't brief that for tonight, but I think you're supposed to have, for example, 6-foot fencing around it, right? And I'm not sure why that was decided to be the right number. Maybe it's just so it's hard to see in, but that's a standard. So if a town were to say we want 10-foot, fencing, I think that they probably couldn't do that unless there's a specific provision in the law that allows for more restrictions. So if the law says, these are intended to be, minimum standards, and, towns can increase these requirements, then I think you could do that. But otherwise you get into what's called state preemption. And when the state preempts you by having a regulation, if the regulation is intended to be all encompassing or, set a specific floor or ceiling, then the town can't go beyond that.
Tor?
Thanks. I'm just want to make sure I didn't step on Wanda's toes here.
Oh.
No.
You're good,
No.
Wanda.
Yeah, I'm good.
I think drafting an ordinance, Peter, right now is a little premature, at least in my mind, because I wanted to myself just know a little bit more about the factors in play. And I think if we are going down the road of a cultivation, allowing cultivation in town and in certain districts, I want to know, I guess, or research a little bit what that looks like in other communities and other towns in the state. I mean, how big are these facilities? What's the hours of use? Is there any pollution or any other nuisance to be, aware of? What's the impact on law enforcement? Is that something that we have to consider? So, there's some things in my mind I'd like to get a little more comfortable with before we get into the language of it. Just in concept, I guess, is where I'm at. So.
Yeah, I'm not looking to rush. And I'm actually happy to kind of do a compare and contrast of the medical rules for your next meeting. If you'd like that, I'm happy to kind of go over what are reasonable regulations under that statute.
Wanda?
So it's my understanding if you're using it for medical use, you have the right to grow so many plants, and that's pretty state, I think. I mean, I think that's the norm. And because we just spent so much time trying to get this code passed, the last thing I would want to do is put an ordinance in place that allows you to do something in a zone that was not allowed in the code. So, we wouldn't want to say, oh, well, we just changed our mind that we can do this out wherever because we think that would be the right place to do it, which I think we should really. So I'm kind of with Thor. I think we need to take a lot of time, and this isn't something that we should really rush into. This is a big deal, and I know it's a up and coming business, like it or not. Everybody has their own opinion, but I think the last thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we don't go against the code that we just worked so hard to get passed. And I think that's vitally important as to whatever road we go down.
Yeah.
That
Rob,
makes sense.
do you have something, Rob?
Yeah, for Peter's benefit, one of the things we talked about last meeting, that the three of us who were there then really felt like this was a Board of Selectmen issue. We're not interested in creating another committee. That we want to do this in a deliberate way, but we thought that this was something that we should handle. Wanda wasn't part of that discussion, but I don't know how you feel.
That would make sense to me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a significant policy discussion. I would tend to recommend, no matter which town is dealing with it, that it's dealt with at either the selectmen or town council level. I totally agree.
Yeah.
Another sort of the way I was, again, reading these materials and thinking about it, I understand that there's a medical marijuana law and there's an adult use law, and that those are separate bases of regulation. But the way I think of it, if we're allowing cultivation in Newcastle, it's cultivation whether it's for the medical market or the adult use market, and that we want to make sure that the impacts of either of those are taken into account in anything that we allow, and that we make sure that we regulate it properly. And I don't know if those need to be treated separately, or we can treat them as one. But I think of them as, if you're growing marijuana, you're growing marijuana, and it's going to have the same impacts no matter which market it goes to.
Well, so I think that's a good and valid point. You would want to have, effectively similar regulations for the uses, because the uses are similar. Unfortunately, I think the way that the law has, basically the way that the legal history turned out, because these had such, diametrically opposed legal regimes for how they were enacted, it's a little bit difficult to do that, I think. But that said, I haven't looked at the medical law in a while, and I'm happy to do that and see if we can do it. One of the problems that I could see running into is if I think this is a low probability problem, but I think it's worth considering. The state medical marijuana law was really designed for people who have a demonstrated medical need for the marijuana. And those folks were considered by the legislature, to basically be the same as someone who needs a blood pressure medication, or, some sort of treatment for Parkinson's. And so the regulations that the town would be able to impose on those uses are much lower than other kinds of uses. So for example, there's even a rule that if you, I believe that this is still in the statute, it was a couple of years ago, if you rent a house to somebody and then find out that the person is growing marijuana in the house as a medical grower, you are not allowed to change their lease or do anything to them, including charging a higher security deposit, because they are a medical grower. And that's a very personal kind of private rights look at where the legislature was kind of considering that law from. The adult use is obviously much more, it was designed by a citizen's petition. It was modified by the legislature in several key ways, but at the end of the day, it was kind of, the idea was to kind of say, well, if towns in Maine want to become locations where this product is allowed, then they can do it, and they can impose reasonable regulations, almost like they would on on any other sort of retail use or commercial or industrial use. So, I'm happy to look at how we could regulate them, and if we could do it concurrently. But I think there are some problems with that.
Sure.
So Peter, you had mentioned something earlier, and it was stuck in my mind. I think it's a great idea, but it was the idea that the ordinance would stand alone. So it wouldn't be integrated into the use table of the code, which was my first go-to thought, was changing, say, agricultural use to encompass marijuana cultivation. But I think the deficiency in that idea is if you do want to change it, it has to go to town meeting every time. So not that the ordinance wouldn't, but it'd just be a little more complicated. So on that idea where you have an ordinance, can cultivation, for example, can that be handled in like a quasi vendor ordinance where there's a license that gets renewed? I don't know what, biannually, or every 5 years, whatever. So that in effect, if there is something that you want to change or abolish it, let's say, you're not held to a grandfather clause.
Yeah, right. So that's an excellent idea. And for example, some of the towns where I've written these, we've done it exactly like you're describing. The idea that I had a similar idea when we were going through this is to think about what's called a victualler's license. And victualers are people who sell victuals. And basically it's places that sell food and alcohol. And the way that many towns regulate those uses, I'm thinking of Bar Harbor, Portland, Brunswick, Freeport, Auburn, I'm sure has one. What they do is they basically say, okay, if you want to be a restaurant, you have to come back and get a victualler's license every year. And just like an alcohol use, and if there are too many violations of the state health code, or you have too many fights outside the bar, or lots of other uses, because food and alcohol always have to go together in Maine, you can basically pull the victualler's license very easily, and that effectively shuts the the alcohol use down. And so yeah, I had the same idea. I thought it was a great idea, because you could easily see that there might be situations in which there might be, I mean, I'm not trying to tar anybody, but this is largely this is an industry that's coming out of the shadows at the current time. And you could it's not a big leap to think, well, there since these were illegal activities just a little while ago, they could still be linked to other illegal activities. So if you were having to see lots of sheriff's activity in Newcastle around a given use, right, not someone who's being legal about everything they do, but someone who might be interested in other illegal methods of making money, you could easily pull that license, and that would shut down that use for marijuana. Then if you still have people visiting that location looking like a retail location, it's a lot easier for the state police or somebody else to figure out what's being sold, right? So no, I think that's a great idea. I think having an annual renewal is a terrific idea. I think you can't do it for medical, but you could easily do it for adult use. Yeah. Oh, and one more thing. I also agree about keeping it in a separate ordinance, and here's why. There are kind of two things we don't know about right now. So far, the federal government has not taken an enforcement role in any of these activities by the different states. That said, it is still illegal federally to sell marijuana. So, it might be that in 5 years things change, and all of a sudden, the feds say, okay, any state that's going to allow, marijuana to keep going, we're going to come and enforce on you. And that might promote state action to say, okay, we're going to revoke, one or both of these laws. Well, if you've got to take it out of every single chart and every single, district and all that stuff, you're cleansing a lot of stuff, Okay. Now, if you have to change that in the ordinance already for some other purpose, I mean, look, you can't make everything, perfect, but it's just like shoreline zoning ordinances. Those are subject to state rule changes, and because they should be distinct from the core land use ordinance, or at least if they should be made to be or distinct if you need to make them that way. So in this case, where it's even less secure than a shoreline zoning ordinance, I look at it and I say, hey, I'd like to keep this separate for at least the next 5 years. If it's made legal federally and the state doesn't change everything, hey, it might just become like any other activity. And, then you integrate it into the land use ordinance with much less fuss. But until that happens, I'm, totally of the opinion that we should kind of hold off and keep it its own ordinance for now.
So I had a question, Peter. So, I mean, you must have looked at a number of different towns' ordinances in dealing with cultivation. Are some of them more detailed than others that really just make it clear what's allowed and what's not, and try and allow it in certain areas, or allow it in to a certain level, but not to just sort of go wild, or how have you seen that end of it regulated, I guess is the question.
So there's definitely a range.
Other than zone, zone's
Right.
the easy one, but it's everything else that gets kind of tricky.
Yep. So I've seen regulations where it's, required to be in a zone.
Yeah.
I've seen regulations where it's required to be in a zone and a certain number of feet from the road. I've seen there's one locale I know of that has, I think, all indoor growing, but they're very tight about outdoor growing. And so there are lots of different ways that people are dealing with those issues. And then, then I have other, other towns that basically don't really regulate much on cultivation because they have the feeling, a little bit dovetailed to what Rob said, is that, there are some rules already in place about medical growing. And they basically said, well, if people can grow medically, then, maybe we don't care if they can grow, adult use marijuana as well. And I mean, I'm not in that camp. I think this is, despite making a kind of a joke about it, I mean, it is a serious subject, and you are dealing with a narcotic. And so, when you look at kind of the regulatory framework of different towns, you can see, there's some towns that are very laissez-faire and just, want the tax revenue. And then you see other towns that are, pretty strict about it. And, they're looking to kind of balance those uses and say, hey, we might want to keep this away from kids walking back and forth to school, kind of like, the way you think of the entrances on bars, right? They've got to be so many feet from churches and outside of school zones and all that sort of stuff. But there's just kind of the whole range of different stuff that you see in terms of how the different locales have done this. There are some towns ordinances that I really like. I like the Washington Ordinance quite a bit. I had a hand in drafting that one along with a committee. I like the way that Bath has enacted it. And I think one of the very first ones was either I think it's Northeast Harbor, over there by Bar Harbor. It's not Bar Harbor, but it's one of the towns outside Bar Harbor. They were one of the first, and it's actually a very thoughtful ordinance. So I'm happy to supply those as models to look at.
Yeah. So does anyone else have any questions for Peter right this instant, or do you want to sort of open up the discussion onto what the board wants to do as far as moving forward. Whether it's more education, whether it's running away from it, whether it's kicking the can down the road. What is everyone sort of feeling right now? Anyone? Wanda?
I don't think, and I missed the last meeting, but I don't think I have enough information to really make a decision. I think if Peter can share those ordinances with us and I can reread, I read it briefly, but reread like what John sent us a couple weeks ago. I think that might be helpful to kind of get a better feel for what's going on. I just don't think I have enough information to make a decision kind of which direction I think we ought to go as a board.
Definitely. So Rob?
Yeah, I just want to say, I think, we definitely need to learn more. I come back to that, I know that it sounds like we're very limited in what we can do to regulate the medical marijuana caregivers, but I want to make sure that we're doing what we can. And because it's already here, I want to make sure we're doing, what we can to protect the town. And then if we're allowing that part of it, I think with the same level of regulation, it seems like the adult use, we would treat similarly. So that's kind of, I kind of feel like we do need to do something because it's already here. But I think we definitely need to learn more.
Mm-hmm. Tor?
Yeah, I guess like I said before, I'm looking for more information, and part of that exploration for me is getting an understanding of what cultivation facilities are, and if there's a corporate, do these, is there a corporate aspect to this, large scale? So if there's someplace, somebody that can point us in their direction and, or, say, well, look here, this is a, this is a, let's say a $10 million business here. This fits on this type of footprint. This is the size of the town this is in. So I'm looking for examples like that. And it doesn't have to be in Maine. It could be in Massachusetts, some other states where they've had a longer track record with this. So that's what I'm looking for is sort of a visual on, what an industrial cultivation facility looks like, what a mom and pop facility looks like, and I guess that's what I'd like to get a handle on.
I reached out to Mafka. I guess it was after our meeting, so it was either that week or it was the week after our meeting, and tried to get a little bit of guidance from them, just as representing agriculture and growers, and they have a whole marijuana certification process, and I didn't get anywhere with them. There was no one there that handled any of that. I did get a name from someone in the state that I was trying to reach out to, but I haven't heard back from. That's supposed to be helpful with that, but it's hard. I called around all my farmer friends to find out if they had any interest in it, in their vegetable growers and things like that, whether it was something they were even considering. And it was nothing they were really considering getting in on necessarily, except for maybe seedlings was the only thing I heard from some of the people, was that the ability to sell seedlings would be pretty huge potentially for revenues. But and I can't quite seem to find and everyone I've talked to, I haven't found a sort of a group that represents the commercial growers. So it's hard to find that, but I think we probably could try and look into that. I mean, is it worth looking at some of the ordinances that Peter has and maybe reaching out, seeing if we can get a better snapshot of what we might be looking at and how we would draft an ordinance if we continued with it to regulate some of that, or something we should put on in the next meeting, or?
I'm definitely interested in those 3 towns Peter mentioned.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, so why don't we discuss it again in our next meeting? Peter can send us all that information. I can reach out to, again, the person I had at the state level that might be able to actually give us a better snapshot as to what's going on with it.
And maybe between the state and Peter, we can get a little more sense of our ability to regulate the caregiver activities. I think that's kind of a piece that I don't want to lose.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I apologize. I didn't realize that was part of the discussion tonight, or I would have prepped it. I'll do that for the next time.
Okay. Anyone else have anything on that? John, do you have anything?
No, it seems like clear direction. I'm ready to go.
All right. Sounds good. All right. So moving on to 5.2. Planning.
Peter, if he's
What's that?
Is Peter sticking around, or is he?
I'm happy to if you need me. Otherwise, I'll sign off.
I don't think we need you. John, do you think we need Peter for
No.
our next discussion? No?
No, but yeah, whatever works. If any of you feel like you need him to stick around, just go ahead. Otherwise, he can go off and
Yeah.
go back to doing what town attorneys do when they're not on Zoom calls.
Golf, don't they? Peter,
Talking about a planning board refund next. So if you want to stick around for that, you can. But otherwise, yeah.
No, I'm good. I'm good. You guys have a good one. If
All
you
right.
need me, let me know.
Peter.
Give a call.
See ya.
Good night.
Good night.
All right. So moving on to 5.2, planning board fee refund, Bucky, Holloway. We discussed this at our last meeting. The planning board sent a recommendation that the permit fee be refunded to Bucky Holloway, who has Coastal Boat Works, Route 1 in Newcastle. He applied under the former ordinance before the vote and the adoption of or at least before the adoption of the new ordinance. And it was recommended that he apply under the new ordinance because it would actually work better for a situation. So the question was brought up at last meeting, whether the fee should be refunded. Yeah, so we can just sort of take the discussion from there, I guess. Wanda?
I don't think it's fair to take two permit fees from him. I think one is more than fair enough. I mean, the planning board's been working with him, firsthand, and I think we should follow their recommendation and give him back his refund. That would be my take.
Okay. Tor?
Yeah, I just want to thank the planning board for writing the summary as we requested, and it helped me get a better understanding, of the process, sort of a real brief recap of where it came from and, what the position was. So I appreciate that. So I am in favor of supporting the planning board's decision on this.
Rob, do you have anything to add?
I think again, I agree. I think the planning board has been closest to this, and throughout this process, the permit was withdrawn. I think I support the planning board.
Okay. Let me just get to.
I'd also add that I think it's cleaner, assuming we do this, it's cleaner that old application fee be refunded, and then he separately pays, for the permit that he is applying for under the new code.
Yeah, I was just looking to see if I had any amounts on it, but I don't here. So do we need to make a motion on this, John? Probably
Yes, you
should.
do. Yep. Yep.
Do I have a motion to refund? I just want to get this right. I don't know if the permit was filed under Coastal Boat Works or under Bucky Holloway. I don't have it.
Coastal Boatworks DBA Bucky Holloway.
Okay.
Excuse me, Bucky Holloway DBA Coastal Boatworks.
The
Okay.
amount is 3450, Joel.
3450. To refund the permit from November 2020. Coastal Boatworks DBA Bucky Holloway, the amount of $3,450, and to it's not ask, it's to require the payment of.
I think that's separate. I think I think all we're doing now is just my understanding. All we're doing now is just refunding that. He's got a new application. It's got its fee. I don't think we need to explicitly say that. I think that's just part of the process because he's got a new application.
Yeah, but he hasn't paid it yet is the problem. If he had paid it, it would be different. It would be one clean.
Yeah.
I think it should be noted because there's a reason why we're doing it.
Yeah. Okay. Good point.
Okay. So
Correct.
I'm trying to clean this up for Michelle, but it's not working. From the 3450, with the condition that the permit fee under the new schedule is paid under the new plan. Do I have a motion for that? Tor? Do I have a second?
I'd like to, well,
We can discuss. Do
yeah.
you want to move it or not?
I want to move it, but I want.
We can discuss it, but we have to move it and second it.
I had a comment. Yeah.
So you move it?
I move.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Yes, so I just think we should add the summary from the planning board to this motion, so that's recorded.
Good idea.
Okay. Okay, so I'll make an amendment to the motion that we add the letter from Ben Fry, Chair of the Planning Board, in along with this. All right.
So moved.
Okay. Second. Any further discussion? All right. All those in favor? Passes 4-0. All right. Let me get back to my thing. Okay, so moving on to a town warrant of $22,940.02. Do I have a motion to accept? Rob moves. Do I have a second?
Second.
Tor second. Any discussion? Rob and then Wanda.
I just noticed that this month, we had $12,500 for Harris Computer Systems. Last month, we had 16,700. Were those? Is that? I thought that was. Is that Trio? What or is that what? What is all this?
Yeah, Harris is Trio. So what we're doing is we're moving the amounts of when it's due, because there was an issue of, I think I mentioned this last time, about somehow the timing of when our year for our software contract was April 1st, and so we're moving it, and so we had to prorate what we'd used of the year. So
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
really messed up, to be honest with you. I'm not really the best way I can describe it is it's really screwed up. But the idea is pay once annually for all of this, and be done with it. But we had the initial, and then we had to clean it up with the second invoice. So
Okay.
of course you don't see credits. All you see is the debits on the warrant. So it looks messed up.
Okay,
Well,
thank you.
Wanda?
And I don't mean to be petty, but we have lights and blacktop patch that's bought again out of town. And I think we should really be using the vendors that are in our town that pay taxes to our town whenever possible. And I'm pretty sure we have vendors in our town that could supply both of those probably at the same cost. So I would just like, once again, I've done this before, but once again, to really encourage us using our own people, our own businesses in town, whenever possible.
Yeah, and I'm not exactly sure why the patch especially was bought, because I know that was an issue a year ago. So I'll check on that, see if I can figure out what that's about, because we talked about that last year too. So,
I think in the
you're right.
last,
I missed that one. Yep.
I think in the last warrant that we had, there was quite a bit that came from
Mm.
Louis Doe's. So I don't know if it's out of it or whatever, but I have been noticing that's been an invoice that I've been seeing. So
Yeah.
all right. Does anyone have anything else on the warrant?
Yeah.
All right. All those in favor? Passing. All right. Passes 4-0. And not to drive Michelle crazy, but I did jump over the town manager report and communications. Was there anything you wanted to highlight, John, or bring up, or?
The only thing I'd say, I had a good chat with Jim today, and the reval work is progressing well. A lot, not a lot, but we've had a number of people who've reached out to him with, additions, amendments to their property cards, which is really helpful because that just makes for a more accurate representation when those values come out. So he's really happy with that. Also, I'd say thanks to the folks who are reaching out, because they're not because they're positive, but it's nice to have some positive feedback to say, hey, thank you for reaching out to me and asking. Because sometimes the value, people worried about the tax man and what are they going to do, and this has been a real positive experience, and people are using this as a good opportunity, and they're also saying thank you, thanks for looking at this stuff, thanks for checking these things, and that may seem obvious, but sometimes it's not. So it's been a good experience so far. Jim's sending out corrections, and he's still on pace to come out and send out some letters end of April, early May with values. So I would expect folks early May will have a letter in their mailbox saying, here's your old value, here's your new value. And so we'll see about that. And then also, depending upon where we are in the budget, potentially we could have estimated mill rates available, which will be very helpful for us as we try to figure out what that means moving forward. But I don't make plans on that. Don't make that your lottery numbers or anything like that. It's a very difficult, and there's still a lot of work to be done. But if we can do that, I think it will help to explain the kind of the change, because everyone's, there's a lot of conversation about, well, you change the values so my taxes go up. And I mean, I think the four of you understand, but for those watching who don't, valuation changes does not necessarily mean a direction, that same increase in your tax bill. You're just one piece of a many-pieced pie. And just the question is, how much is your piece of pie growing or shrinking compared to everyone else's growing and shrinking? So the numbers are, the market is remaining hot, but the intensity of the market seems to be much more locally based than probably what we're reading in the news. the news is saying, oh, these folks are coming from away and they're buying these properties. But as Jim said at your meeting two times ago, I just want to keep repeating this. I know you guys heard this a month ago, but I want to say it again just so we can kind of start to get it into the consciousness of the community. The increases in value that we're seeing in Newcastle are coming in terms of percentage increases are the same whether they're coming from an out-of-state buyer or whether they're coming from a Lincoln County buyer. So we're not seeing, what all of us, see in our mind's eye of, the folks from New Hampshire or Massachusetts or New York. They come up and they overpay for the price, and this is what we, and that's what's boosting the values. What the numbers that Jim's seeing is that those increased prices are coming from Lincoln County as often as they're coming from, New York, Massachusetts, etc. So whatever we see, it's a local phenomenon as much as it's a statewide phenomenon or nationwide phenomenon. So this will require more work, but we're moving ahead, and I think we're going to be in a very good position come this summer when we have these values in place, because we'll be really well positioned to deal with whatever happens as this real estate boom, I suppose, moves, from here. Whether it's we keep riding that wave and we adjust accordingly now that we have better information and more accurate information, or we adjust downward because a bubble pops. Let's hope that doesn't happen. But the most important thing is we have accurate information, and that's what these letters coming back recently are providing us with. So that information is invaluable to us because it allows us to have a more accurate number. And that's really what it's all about. It's not really so much the value as the accuracy and trying to get the best possible number so that we have a true representation of what is on a given parcel. And that's why we do the reval. It's not to have increased values or decreased values, it's to have accuracy. And so that's what at the very least, at this point in the process, things are going quite well.
And if people do have questions on their tax cards or something that's amiss,
email.
Best way to handle that is
email assessor@newcastlemaine.us. Call the office if you have other questions. I mean, the office is there. We love to talk to folks, but Jim Murphy, our assessor's agent, is the one who can singularly address these issues. I can certainly talk about a lot of things, but really talk about edits to your property card. That's a Jim Murphy conversation. And so the best way to do that really is email, because you can put, write down exactly what you have on there. You can take sketches and take pictures of it and put it in the email. It's such an easy thing to do, and it really helps move the ball forward. So when he can come in, he can get a lot of them done really quickly and get them back out to you. Again, Jim's there once a week. So Monday afternoons or Monday mornings, he's working through these issues. So email assessor@newcastlemaine.us, please, please, please.
Yeah, because he found an extra bedroom I didn't know I had. So
who's sleeping? You could charge that out,
I'm looking for it. I've spent the past week just looking for it. I've just been looking at the walls and saying maybe there's a hidden room back here. I don't know, but I haven't found it yet. So anyway, so that's good. So
John, I just want to make a pitch for the new website and with tax information. I love the interactive maps that now are available on the website. You can go in, look at tax parcels. You can get basically see the tax card for all the properties in town. It's a really interesting tool to look at the whole town and to look at different properties. I think that's a huge step forward for the town in having information available to the public. And I think it's great.
all right.
And since you said that, let me just real quick. This is the new website here. Can everyone see this here? See my little cursor here? We got our gulls that are about to eat something and who knows what. Right in the middle, click on maps and property info and opens up this new website. We've had this up and the office has been using this for some time, but if you agree, and all you have to do is just like Google Maps, you can scroll in, you can look at, you know, different areas of town. Of course, it's going to take forever because we're on Zoom, but you see all the buildings. You can turn on the layers, so you see, oh, what's the zoning information? You go for zoning information right here, and then presto changeo, there's the zoning map that the voters approved in November. So you can do a whole bunch of stuff. There's, you know, wetlands information. You can look at shoreline zoning if you want to look at shoreline zoning instead of zoning, the regular zoning information. Head out to East Old County Road. There's some resource protection, some wetlands. So there's a lot of different things you can do with this mapping website. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because it really is a really nice tool. And as we get more comfortable with it, more and more we'll get on here and we'll be able to update. But it's you know, it's not like a new car, because the new car works well, but just there's bugs, you know. So we're working out the bugs, but you know, we also have the audit, which took a lot of time away from being able to spend time on doing the website updates. But we're full steam ahead.
It's called beta, John.
Yeah, it's a beta launch. That's right. It's like a beta fish right now. I'm not really getting much accomplished on it, but anyway.
No.
Oh, that's good. All right. Does anyone have anything else they want to go over on the town administrator's report? All right. So do I have a motion to adjourn?
So
Tor, do I have a second? Rob? All those in favor? Passes